Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now while there may be lower cost, better performing processors than the AMD Ryzen 5 3600 in 2022, it's the availability and accessibility of the AM4 platform that continues to make this thing a very tempting choice. You could pick one of these up for 100 quid, slap it in a cheap second-hand B450 or maybe even an A320 motherboard if you really wanted to, and you've got the beginnings of a sensibly priced yet capable gaming and content creation computer. The Ryzen 3600 was a solid all-rounder back in 2019, and just like its predecessors, the 2600 and 1600, you got a lot back from your not-so-substantial investment. It's still really capable 3 years on, and in terms of multi-core processing power, it'll sit comfortably above a Ryzen 7 1700X and Intel Core i3-12300, and just below an i5 11400. It doesn't hold up as well in single-core performance these days, but it's still a respectable result. In real-world scenarios such as rendering a video in DaVinci Resolve, it'll be more than enough, and anyone looking to put together an inexpensive editing system should still consider it. It feels snappy to use here in both editing and exporting projects. In terms of gaming performance, pairing the Ryzen 3600 with a modern entry-level card like the RTX 3050 for example, will prove to be a very competent combination. I originally found this CPU in a cache converter's PC that I purchased a couple of weeks ago, and for the past few days I've been using it on a daily basis on my test bench with a couple of different GPUs. It's an absolute joy to use, and if you already have one of these and haven't yet upgraded, well, I can see why. I'm using the stock cooler, or a stock cooler that I had at the back of the drawer, probably from back when I originally bought one of these. It does an acceptable job at doing what it's supposed to and doesn't get too loud at all. I'd prefer to see slightly lower temps of course, but all the temperatures shown today are well within normal range of what I'd expect without an aftermarket solution. I've probably been spoilt by the Noctua heatsink on my Intel system, but if you do buy one of these processors second hand and it doesn't come with the OG cooler, I'd seriously consider third-party options, especially if you want to attempt overclocking. After spending Saturday with the RTX 3050 in the system, I swapped it out for a 3070 on the Sunday and played the same games again, this time at 1440p. A higher end card like this is better suited to higher resolutions of course, and the 3600 did a decent job at keeping up. Now I wouldn't necessarily suggest this pairing, not if you're about to build a PC from scratch, but if you have a Ryzen 5 3600 and are wondering whether to upgrade to a graphics card like this before going CPU shopping, well then you shouldn't have too much to worry about. There may be the occasional instance in particularly notorious CPU intensive games like Cyberpunk for example, where you might see 90 to 95% utilisation in busy downtown areas, especially if you have high crowd density options enabled. I also noticed relatively high CPU usage in Battlefield 5, but again, no major issues. I think the 3600 is still a great recommendation as an ideal go-to all-rounder, even now in 2022, especially if you live somewhere with a healthy second-hand market, one that's full of the second-hand 6 cores and well-priced AM4 motherboards. It's also important to consider other options as well though. Let's take the Ryzen 5 5500 for example, a relatively recent 6-core chip that you can find new for a similar price in some cases. That may offer slightly better performance, but unlike the older 3600 here, it doesn't support PCIe 4.0. You might want to consider second-hand Intel options too, like a 10400F and budget Socket 1200 motherboard for example. There are other choices too, of course, but the 3600 is still amongst some great second-hand choices, and if you bought one back in the day, I think it was certainly money well spent. You've still got a really nice upgrade path there as well, and the same can be said if you wanted to buy one of these days. This was more of a Ryzen 3600 appreciation post than anything else, celebrating one of 2019's best CPUs, and one that still retains its reputation as a decent all-rounder. Thank you very much for watching then. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you think of this CPU, as well as whether or not you still use one, of course. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.